They dragged her inside the courthouse, calling her trash in front of everyone. But what they didn't know, she was the judge presiding that very day. By sunset, the same cops who humiliated her were standing in her courtroom, begging for mercy. This is Raw Tales Stories, where truth walks back up the same steps that tried to break it. Collision. Subscribe now for more powerful stories like this, stories that hit deep, real, and unforgettable. The sun was just beginning to rise over downtown Atlanta, painting the courthouse steps in soft gold. The city buzzed with the sound of honking cars, murmuring pedestrians, and the distant cry of street vendors. Among the crowd that morning was Dr. Vanessa Carter, a woman of quiet power, tall, confident, and striking in her navy suit. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached the courthouse. In her right hand she held a black leather briefcase. In her left, a cup of coffee she'd barely touched. She wasn't just anyone heading into work. She was about to preside over one of the most high-profile civil rights cases the city had seen in years. But no one around her knew that. Just across the street, a small protest was gathering. People held signs, chanting about justice and police reform. The noise grew louder as reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. At that same moment, two uniformed officers, Sergeant Miller and Officer Jacobs, were standing nearby, scanning the crowd for possible agitators. That's when they saw her, Vanessa. A black woman walking toward the restricted courthouse entrance, not wearing a visible badge, her briefcase clutched close. Jacobs elbowed his partner. "Hey, Miller, see her? That one's heading to the staff door. She doesn't have clearance." Miller frowned. "Let's check it out." Vanessa had just reached the steps when she heard a voice behind her. "Ma'am! Stop right there!" She turned, startled, her coffee sloshing slightly. "Excuse me? ID," Miller barked. "This entrance is for authorized personnel only." Vanessa raised a calm eyebrow. "I am authorized. I work here." But Miller didn't even let her finish. "Aha, that's what they all say." "Ma'am, step aside." She blinked. "All who, exactly?" He didn't answer. He just reached for her arm. The crowd began to notice. Phones came up, recording. "Hey, what's going on?" someone shouted. "She didn't do anything," another yelled. Vanessa's voice was steady, though her heart thumped hard in her chest. "Officer, please take your hand off me. You're making a mistake." Jacobs laughed under his breath. "Mistake? You trying to tell us how to do our job?" Miller grabbed her arm firmly this time, pulling her forward. "You can explain it inside. We're not arguing on the street." Her briefcase fell open, scattering papers, court documents, legal notes, a silver pen with her name engraved on it. But the officers didn't even glance at them. They dragged her up the courthouse steps as she struggled to stay composed. The cameras followed, flashes going off. Reporters whispered, "Who is she?" Vanessa tried again, her voice cracking slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. "I work here. I am the—" But before she could finish, Jacobs interrupted with a smirk. Yeah, I bet you're the mayor too." Laughter erupted from a few onlookers. Others stared, horrified. One elderly woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "That's not right, she's dressed like a lawyer." But the officers were too deep in their assumption to see beyond it. Inside the lobby, the marble floors echoed with every step. The receptionist, a young woman named Sophie, froze when she saw what was happening. "Officers, what are you doing?" she gasped. Miller replied curtly, "Bringing in a protester who tried to breach the restricted area." Sophie's eyes darted to Vanessa's face, her jaw dropping. "She's not." Vanessa shook her head gently, silently asking Sophie not to intervene. Her voice was calm, low, dignified. "Let them finish what they started," she said softly. They led her through the hallway, past portraits of former judges, all white men, lining the walls. Each portrait seemed to stare down at the scene, as if history itself was watching yet another injustice unfold. Miller finally released her arm once they reached the courtroom door. "All right, ma'am, Let's get some idea and figure out what game you're playing. Vanessa straightened her jacket, picking up her briefcase that had been dragged along the floor. She looked at them both with eyes full of restrained power. Gentlemen, she said quietly, you'll find out soon enough who I am. Miller smirked. Yeah, I can't wait. As she walked into the courtroom, silence fell. The clerk, the bailiff, and the attorneys who had arrived early all stared, wide-eyed. Everyone in that room knew her. Miller noticed the change in atmosphere. What's everyone staring at? Vanessa walked to the front, set down her briefcase, and took a deep breath. She turned to the officers one last time, her tone sharp but measured. I told you I work here, she said. Then, without breaking eye contact, she reached for the black judge's robe hanging behind the bench. The officers' smiles faded. Vanessa slowly slipped into her robe, black, crisp, and symbolic of everything they had just disrespected. Whispers broke out among the courtroom staff. One man muttered, "Oh my God, that's Judge Carter." Miller's hand fell from his belt. Jacobs took a nervous step back. Vanessa looked at them, calm, poised, unbroken. "Officers," she said quietly, "I believe you've brought your case directly to my courtroom." The room froze. Not a whisper. Not a cough. Only the echo of Vanessa's heels clicking against the polished floor as she walked toward the bench, the same bench from which she delivered verdicts, corrected attorneys, and restored faith and justice. But today, the air felt heavier. The humiliation she'd endured outside still lingered, clinging to her like a cold mist. Yet her face showed no anger. Only calm, the kind that made everyone else uncomfortable. Sergeant Miller stood motionless, his jaw slightly open. Officer Jacobs shifted uneasily, his earlier arrogance now melting into confusion. "Wait," Jacobs muttered. "You're the judge?" Vanessa turned to him slowly. Her voice was soft, but every syllable carried authority. "I am Judge Vanessa Carter. And you too, just dragged me into my own courtroom." A wave of shock rippled across the room. The clerk, Sophie, rushed forward, whispering frantically, "Your Honor, are you okay?" "I tried to stop them." Vanessa gently raised her hand. "I know, Sophie. Let's not escalate this further." "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. But she refused to let them see her break. The officers stammered, their faces burning red. "Ma'am, Your Honor, we thought—" "You thought wrong," Vanessa said firmly. The bailiff entered, immediately recognizing her. "What on earth is going on?" he demanded, glaring at the officers. Vanessa gave a brief nod. "Please escort them to the gallery. We'll address this after court is in session." Her tone left no room for argument. Miller hesitated. "Judge Carter, with all due respect—" "You've already shown how much respect you have," she replied, her words cutting but composed. The courtroom murmured, reporters taking notes, attorneys exchanging stunned glances. Everyone in that room knew that what had just happened wasn't just embarrassing, it was career-ending. Vanessa took her seat behind the bench, smoothing her robe with slow, deliberate grace. It was her throne, and for a moment she simply breathed, letting the symbolism of the act sink in. Dragged through her own courthouse, now presiding over it again. She looked out over the courtroom, her gaze steady. "Court is now in session," she announced, the sound of the gavel echoing like thunder. For the next 20 minutes, Vanessa conducted the scheduled hearing flawlessly, as if nothing had happened. The defense spoke, the prosecution argued, witnesses were called. But everyone's attention kept drifting toward the back, where Miller and Jacobs sat stiffly, eyes fixed on the floor. Even they couldn't escape the irony of it. Every word she spoke reminded them of the mistake they had made, the arrogance that had blinded them. After the hearing adjourned, Vanessa stood. "Everyone except the 2 officers may be dismissed." The courtroom emptied quickly, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence. Miller and Jacobs stood awkwardly near the door, hats in hand, eyes downcast like schoolboys caught cheating on an exam. Vanessa stepped down from the bench, walking toward them slowly. Her heels clicked, calm, measured, powerful. "Tell me," she said softly. What made you decide to stop me today? Jacob swallowed hard. Ma'am, there was a protest outside. We were told to watch for any suspicious activity near the entrance. And I looked suspicious to you? He hesitated. You didn't have an ID badge visible. And you were. She raised an eyebrow. And I was. He froze. His partner tried to cover. It wasn't about race, Your Honor. It was procedure. Procedure doesn't justify humiliation, Vanessa said, her tone still calm, but icy now. I told you I worked here. I told you to stop. Yet you dragged me through those doors like a criminal. Her voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. Do you know what it feels like, she continued, to walk into a place where you've spent your life defending justice, only to be treated like you don't belong? Neither man answered. Their silence spoke volumes. The bailiff re-entered, holding a report form. Your Honor, I'll be filing the incident report immediately. Vanessa nodded but kept her eyes on the officers. Not yet, she said. They're going to write their own statements first. And I want honesty, not excuses. Miller nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. I mean, Your Honor. She studied them for a moment longer, then turned away, exhaling deeply. Dismissed. But we'll speak again after I've read your reports. They left quietly, their boots echoing in the hall, heavy with shame. When they were gone, Vanessa sat back down, her composure finally cracking. She rested her face in her hands. The courtroom was empty, but the humiliation still echoed in her ears, the laughter, the disbelief, the way they had pulled her forward like she was nothing. She thought about her father, a man who had marched with Dr. King, who'd always told her, Baby, wear your dignity like armor. They can't take it from you unless you let them. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away, whispering to herself, I didn't let them take it, Daddy. But it still hurts. Her phone buzzed. A message from a reporter friend. Vanessa, the video's already online. It's everywhere. Her heart sank. She opened the clip, a shaky cell phone video of herself being dragged up the courthouse steps. Hundreds of thousands of views. Thousands of angry comments. Hashtags already trending. Hashtag Judge Carter. Hashtag Justice for Vanessa. Hashtag This is America. Vanessa sighed and leaned back in her chair. This is bigger than me now, she whispered. Much bigger. Outside, the courthouse was surrounded by cameras. The same reporters who had ignored her earlier now wanted interviews. Police officers gathered nervously, unsure of what would happen next. And inside, one woman, calm, hurt, but unbroken, was preparing for what she knew was coming. A storm. Not one she feared, but one she intended to face head-on. When they dragged her through those doors, they thought they were putting her in her place. They didn't know she already owned the room. And what came next would shake the entire city. The video spread faster than wildfire. By dawn, every major network had picked it up. CNN, ABC, Fox, MSNBC, all running the same headline. 2 officers detain black woman at courthouse. Later realize she's the presiding judge. Clips flooded TikTok and Twitter. One frame showed Vanessa being grabbed by the arm. Another showed her walking up the bench, putting on the robe, and that moment, that powerful reversal, became an instant symbol. It wasn't just a video anymore. It was a movement. Vanessa woke up that morning to dozens of missed calls. Her assistant's voice cracked over the phone. Your Honor, we're getting hundreds of interview requests. People want to hear your side. The governor's office called. Even Good Morning America reached out. Vanessa sat on the edge of her bed, her coffee untouched. The irony wasn't lost on her. 1 day ago, she'd been dragged like a criminal. Now, she was being praised like a hero. But she didn't feel like one. Her body still ached from the rough grip on her arm, and her mind couldn't shake the echo of laughter from those steps. She looked in the mirror, tired eyes, flawless suit, but something behind them, broken, quiet. She whispered to her reflection. They saw a threat, not a woman. Not a judge. Just the color. Meanwhile, in the precinct across town, chaos erupted. The police chief, a seasoned black man named Harold Daniels, stood in front of his officers, holding a printout of the news article. His tone was sharp. Gentlemen, we are not about to let this department drown in disgrace. 2 of our own disrespected a judge, in broad daylight, on camera. Miller and Jacob stood in the corner, pale, silent. The chief's voice dropped low. You better pray she shows mercy, because the city won't. Outside the building, protesters had already gathered. Signs read, Justice for Judge Carter. Bias has no badge. We see you now. At the courthouse, reporters swarmed the entrance. Microphones. Flashbulbs. Cameras. And through the noise, Vanessa arrived, calm, composed, in her robe. A reporter shouted, Judge Carter, how does it feel to be at the center of a national conversation on race and policing? She stopped, looked at the sea of faces. And for the first time, she spoke, her voice strong, but trembling with emotion. It feels heavy. Because this isn't about me. This is about every person who was told they didn't belong, who was treated as guilty before they could even speak. I wear this robe not to seek revenge, but to remind this city what justice should look like, and who it should serve. The crowd fell silent. Then applause broke out, loud and defiant. For many watching, it wasn't just a speech, it was a release. That same afternoon, City Hall was in chaos. The mayor, council members, and police representatives debated damage control. One white councilman muttered, We need to handle this quietly. She's already made us look bad enough. The mayor, a sharp black woman named Elaine Monroe, slammed her hand on the table. No. We're not hiding this. We're facing it. The system embarrassed itself, not her. She ordered an emergency inquiry into racial profiling within city law enforcement. And for the first time in decades, the city began to tremble at the idea of real accountability. But behind the headlines, Vanessa's world grew quieter. Her phone buzzed constantly. Praise, invitations, angry messages too. Some accused her of overreacting. Others hailed her as a symbol. But all she wanted was peace. That evening she drove to her father's old church, an abandoned building now. She parked out front, the neon cross flickering in the dusk. Sitting alone in the pews, she whispered to the air, Daddy, you told me justice has to come with grace. But how do I find grace for people who see me as less than human? Tears fell freely this time. She wasn't the judge here. Just a daughter, a woman, a human being. Meanwhile, Miller sat in his apartment, scrolling through comments. His name had leaked online. People were sending threats, calling him a racist, demanding his firing. He threw his phone down, pacing. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he muttered. But deep down, he knew, it had gone exactly as far as his bias allowed. Jacobs called him. Man, you see this? They're saying we're done. Fired. Blacklisted. What did you expect? Miller snapped. We dragged a damn judge. But under his frustration was guilt. He replayed her face, the way she looked at him, not with hatred, but disappointment. That calm hurt more than any insult could. By the next morning, the police union demanded a press conference. Cameras flashed again as Chief Daniels stood beside Vanessa. He cleared his throat. On behalf of the department, we sincerely apologize to Judge Carter. The actions of 2 officers do not reflect the values we claim to uphold. Vanessa nodded, stepping to the microphone. Apologies matter, she said. But accountability matters more. I forgive them. But I will not protect them from the consequences of their choices. The room went silent. Her voice was steady, not angry, not soft, just truth cutting through noise. That night, talk shows debated her every word. Commentators argued. Was it racism or a misunderstanding? Did the officers overstep, or is society too sensitive? But across social media, one clip played over and over again. Vanessa standing tall in her courtroom robe, saying, I told you I work here. And that single sentence became a national slogan. Printed on t-shirts, signs, hashtags. Hashtag I work here, a cry for dignity from people who'd been overlooked, profiled, disrespected. Weeks passed. The investigation continued. Vanessa remained on the bench, refusing interviews, focusing on her work. But something had changed. Each time she stepped into her courtroom, she could feel the shift, more eyes watching, more respect, and more fear. She didn't want fear. She wanted understanding. And she was already planning something bigger, something that would change not just her city, but the system itself. They tried to silence her with shame. But she answered with strength. The world saw a woman humiliated. But she saw a system that needed healing. And the next move she made would shake every badge, every desk, every courtroom in America. The courthouse was unnaturally quiet that morning. Word had spread faster than wildfire. The woman humiliated on the courthouse steps was, in fact, Judge Naomi Daniels, newly appointed to the state's Superior Court. Inside, police officers avoided each other's eyes. The same officers who had manhandled her, Officers Henderson and Carter, stood at the back of the courtroom, pale, nervous, and sweating under their uniforms. But Naomi? She walked in like a storm made of grace. Her robe trailed behind her like black silk armor. Her eyes, calm but sharp, scanned the courtroom, pausing briefly on the two men who'd thrown her to the ground just 48 hours ago. All rise. The bailiff's voice cracked slightly as Naomi took her seat on the bench. It wasn't just another case day, it was her courtroom, her law, her justice. Before the hearing began, the police commissioner and city attorney had requested a private meeting. They wanted to smooth things over. They offered apologies, donations, statements for PR damage control. But Naomi didn't want silence. She wanted accountability. You can't fix this with a headline, she said, voice steady. You fix it with change. They shifted uncomfortably. Her words cut clean, not angry, just true. The same truth that could set a courtroom free, or burn it down. When the bailiff called the next case, Naomi recognized the name immediately, Officer Henderson. It was his misconduct hearing, the one she'd been assigned weeks ago before the attack even happened. Fate had a strange sense of humor. He was about to be judged by the same woman he dragged by the arm. The courtroom went silent as Naomi's gaze fell on him. Henderson tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Your Honor, I didn't know it was you. You shouldn't have had to. Naomi interrupted, voice low but powerful. You should have known I was a human being. A whisper rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Every reporter leaned forward. Naomi didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply read from the law, the same code he had sworn to uphold. She cited sections on abuse of power, unlawful detention, and racial bias in law enforcement. Every word hit like a verdict before the verdict. This isn't just about one officer, Naomi continued. It's about a system that thinks it can decide who deserves dignity. As she spoke, her voice softened, not with pity, but with perspective. She remembered being the law student people underestimated. The intern mistaken for a janitor. The woman who kept her head down, working twice as hard for half the respect. Now, she was standing where change began, not outside the courthouse, but inside it. Henderson's lawyer tried to object, but Naomi's ruling was swift and final. The case would go to a disciplinary tribunal with full public oversight. No cover-ups. No quiet suspensions. The world would see everything. After the session, Henderson approached her privately in the empty hall. His voice was trembling. Judge Daniels, I'm sorry. Naomi looked at him, not as a victim, not even as a judge, but as a woman who had fought too long to let bitterness define her. Learn from it, she said. Because apologies don't fix what we keep repeating. Then she walked away, slow, deliberate, unshaken. The camera crews waiting outside didn't see anger or revenge. They saw power reclaimed. By evening, the footage went viral again, but this time, not of the arrest. This time, It was Naomi Daniels on the bench, commanding the room with quiet thunder. The hashtag Judge Daniels Justice trended nationwide. Commentators called her the face of reform. Young girls across the country watched and saw themselves, not as victims, but as leaders. That night, Naomi stood alone in her office. She looked out over the city lights and whispered softly, "You dragged me into this building once. Now, I walk in on my own terms." The courthouse clock struck 9. And for the first time in years, Naomi smiled. Justice had a new voice, and it sounded like hers. Weeks had passed since the courthouse incident, but the ripples were still spreading far beyond the city. Judge Naomi Daniels had become a national figure, her story replayed on every major news channel, discussed in classrooms, churches, and community halls. What began as a moment of humiliation had evolved into something far greater, a movement. The courthouse that once echoed with the whispers of discrimination now buzzed with reform. Security protocols were rewritten. Police officers were undergoing empathy and diversity training led by the very same woman they once mistreated. Every department, from the bailiff to the chief of police, had been forced to look in the mirror. And at the center of it all was Judge Naomi Daniels, who refused to let vengeance drive her, only justice. "If the law can't see us equally," she said during an interview, "then it's blind in all the wrong ways." Officer Henderson, the man who dragged her, had been suspended pending review. But Naomi did something no one expected. She wrote a recommendation for his rehabilitation instead of total dismissal. She didn't excuse him. She educated him. Henderson, humbled, volunteered for community service in the very neighborhood he used to patrol with suspicion. He started mentoring at-risk kids, and one of them asked, "You really pulled down a judge?" He sighed. "Yeah. And I learned the hardest lesson of my life, that respect shouldn't depend on recognition." Naomi heard about his change quietly. She didn't seek public praise. It was enough that change had begun. The speech that moved America. Months later, Naomi was invited to speak at the National Judicial Reform Summit in Washington, D.C. It was a grand stage. Senators, governors, lawyers, activists, and reporters filled the hall. As she walked to the podium, her heels clicked like punctuation marks of purpose. Cameras flashed, but she didn't look at them. She looked at the people. Her voice, calm and commanding, carried through the hall. "Justice isn't blind. It just hasn't been taught to see everyone yet. The system isn't broken, it's just built by hands that never had to fight to be heard. And now it's our job to rebuild it, fair, fearless, and free." By the end, the hall was silent, then erupted into applause that lasted minutes. People stood. Some cried. And in that moment, Naomi realized, this wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced, and forced to smile through it. The quiet moment after the storm. That night, after the speech, Naomi returned to her hotel suite overlooking the Capitol. The lights shimmered below like stars trapped in glass. She took off her heels, sat by the window, and let herself exhale. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother back home. "You made us proud, baby." Grandma would have cried. Naomi smiled softly. For once, the tears that came were not from pain, but peace. The legacy begins. Weeks later, Naomi launched a legal foundation, the Daniels Initiative, dedicated to funding scholarships for Black law students and victims of racial injustice. Applications poured in. Young women from small towns wrote letters saying, "Because of you, I want to wear the robe too." Naomi read every letter, one by one, knowing that her story had stopped being just hers. Final scene, full circle. One morning, Naomi walked back up the same courthouse steps where she was once dragged. Reporters watched, cameras ready, but this time, no one shouted. The officers on duty saluted her, a gesture of respect, not protocol. She paused halfway up the steps and turned slightly, remembering that terrible morning, the confusion, the fear, the anger. And then she smiled. "Justice doesn't forget," she whispered. "It evolves." She pushed the courthouse door open and stepped inside, head high, robe flowing behind her like a banner of victory. The city had learned something that day. You can drag a woman down the steps, but you can't keep her from walking right back up, as a judge, as a symbol, as justice herself. Sometimes power doesn't come from revenge, it comes from grace. And sometimes the very system that tried to break you becomes the one you rebuild. This is her story. This is Raw Tales Stories.